as I knew would happen from the previous episode with the kids, where Aemond was the only one that didn't have a dragon, and he comes into contact with Vhagar, I knew that was going to end up becoming his dragon, right? And so previously the dragon belonged to Laena. But with her dying, the dragon now doesn't have a rider. And somehow, I guess they're supposed to be able to sense this. They usually, light the person on fire. I guess because he lit her on fire, right, at her request. And so he now doesn't have a rider. The expectation would be that I could understand the assumed expectation that, one of Laena's children would take the dragon, but it doesn't always work out that way. And it certainly doesn't here, which leads to a whole bunch of drama. Instead, what ends up happening is Aemond finds Vhagar laying out on the beach. At first I thought the dragon was injured or something like that, but instead it seems to be depressed. Apparently they're sensitive animals. And he mounts the dragon, which catches the attention of Laena's daughters, as well as the attention of Daemon. And then moments later, Rhaenyra. And it leads to issues. It's supposed to be, I think, late at night into the early morning. And after flying for a while and returning with the dragon, he enters into the castle and is confronted by Laena and Daemon's daughters, as well as Rhaenyra's sons. The girls are asking, well, what are you doing riding our mother's dragon? And something that you notice is, and this is in part because of Alicent, I think, kind of poisoning them against Rhaenyra, where in earlier episodes, her kids, at least Aegon, seemed like a normal kid, quite nice. They would get into childlike nonsense, but they weren't too bad beyond that. But in this episode, they're moments of some arrogance from them, where they kind of seem snotty and bratty. Here, when they confront him about this dragon, hey, that was our mother's dragon, what are you doing flying it? He gives them a rather snotty reply, which, kids will be kids. It leads to them fighting and whatnot. He's bigger than the other kids, but with 4-on-1, it's kind of unfair. He picks up a rock to defend himself, and one of Rhaenyra's sons pulls out a little dagger situation, or a knife rather, let's call it. And that's to tell you that Alicent has kind of poisoned these kids against the other kids, has poisoned her children against the other kids, in that, and this doesn't sound like conversation that you need to be having with these kids, in that she's told them, this would be her sons, that Rhaenyra's kids are bastards, that Laenor is not the father of Rhaenyra's children. And, kids being kids, they've repeated what the adults have said. In the present time, it's a different situation, but back then, if we think of this as being back in olden times where there's so much emphasis and importance placed on lineage and whatnot, it's a big deal to call these kids bastards, right? Being the product of, it's not just a matter of their mother being unwed, but rather it calls into question this whole marriage then between Rhaenyra and Laenor, right? And it goes back to, I think, at least the previous episode with Alicent wanting to see the kid, demanding to see the kid and whatnot. And from there, it devolves into bedlam. The one brother throws sand in Aemond's eyes, which was some dirty fighting, and the other brother slices his face. Now, on its own, I would say that was uncalled for. And, Aemond getting cut in the face results in him losing his eye. And with all of this stuff and whatnot, the king's guards rush in, and everyone is then brought before the king. We have it where Alicent is there, the maesters are tending to the eye, and there's concern about, well, it's a pretty gnarly scar. Is it just going to be this really bad scar? But we learned that no, he's also going to lose the eye. I remember reading about this in the book, but it gave more weight to see it play out, where this seemingly, what should have just been a petty squabble between kids, has become so serious and very dangerous due to the machinations of the adults, right? Due to the adults poisoning them against the other kids. So here you have it where this could have just been a simple fight between kids. They throw a couple of punches and whatnot, get scraped up, and everyone goes on about their business. It devolves into a far more serious fight because of what Alicent has been telling her kids. Now, the reality is that in the book, I was kind of undecided between the two, Alicent and Rhaenyra. Part of it was that I couldn't keep everybody, straight. They just kind of ran together for me. But here, having, seen the different people and being able to tell everyone apart and whatnot, I am most certainly not Team Alicent. I do not like her. And I felt like the scene where everyone is gathered in this room with Viserys presiding over things, number one, it gave me a newfound respect for Viserys. I think I wasn't giving him enough credit earlier on, where sure, he's a peacemaker, he tries to keep the peace, he tries to keep his family in line and keep them together in a united front, understanding the importance of this, as doing otherwise would lead to the fall of House Targaryen. I've come to really respect and appreciate his attempt to be diplomatic, where with these two factions that are developing, that he really tries to be fair and just. And as part of this is that he doesn't automatically take his son's side. He also doesn't automatically take Rhaenyra's kid's side. Instead, he tries to get to the bottom of what happened. And in doing this, he starts out by questioning Aemond about, what happened? And Aemond tells him that, they were fighting. And one of Rhaenyra's sons cut his face, right? Which the cut was over his eye. And when questioned, Rhaenyra's son replied that Aemond insulted them. Well, actually, Rhaenyra questions her sons as to what happened exactly. And they tell her that Aemond called them bastards. And so when Viserys asks, well, what led to this fight? And not just what led to the fight, but what led to it escalating to this point, Rhaenyra states that the children were pretty much defending their honor and hers, in that Aemond called them bastards, and the boy responded. Aemond would not have just come up with this on his own. And so when Viserys presses him, where did you hear that from? He doesn't say it, but the camera shifts back and forth and you see him looking at Alicent. We as the audience would then know that Alicent was the one that's told this boy about these kids being bastards, right? She's the one that's poisoned them against it, but he doesn't. Alicent is trying to send a message to him with her eyes of listen, don't you dare. Making eye contact with him to not say anything, to not really answer the question. And so while he is maintaining eye contact with Alicent, he instead turns around and states it to, that Aegon was the one that told him. But Aegon would have gotten that from his mother. So really it came from Alicent. And even at that, Aegon, being a little bit older, can think more quickly and also knows not to say Alicent. And instead, presents it to Viserys as, well, it's an open secret. Everyone knows. Look at the kids. And when you think about it, unlike some of the other houses, the Valyrians also have this grayish white hair, right? That the Targaryens have. So you think of it, if this is a valid marriage and these children are the product of Laemon and Rhaenyra's marriage, with both parents and their parents' parents for however many generations back having this gray hair, where's this brown hair coming from? And it's kind of an interesting thing. If you think back to Game of Thrones, where I think that was a thing with Joffrey, where Ned Stark went back through the books and whatnot, looking at hair color to figure out that Joffrey was not the then king's son. And so here you have something similar going on with them determining or questioning parentage based on the color of the child's hair. And so you have this whole thing playing out where Alicent has poisoned these kids. The boy cutting Aemond was overboard. But what are you going to do at that point? And it tells you the kind of person that Alicent is, that her response is there needs to be some kind of retribution, some kind of payback. And she demands that one of Rhaenyra's sons loses an eye. And it's just like, ma'am, these are kids. In a situation like this, you as the adults stepping in, it's one thing if they were just fighting, but given the level that it's gotten to, like, you guys as adults, you've done enough. You don't need to do any more, right? Like, you've escalated this situation and taken it to a place where it absolutely did not need to go. You've done enough. Just let it drop here, because it's just going to get worse and worse as it goes on. But Alicent is just a problem child. And the thing that strikes me is she started out as like this really meek and mild character. If you think back to the earlier episodes where she was like getting bossed around by her dad. And it's like, you are in the position that you're in, ma'am, simply by virtue of Rhaenyra's mother / Viserys' first wife dying. If not for that, you would have been no one within this conversation. You know, your father would have likely arranged for you to be married off to some lord or something like that of far less standing. And it's like, just by virtue of your father putting you into position, that's how you got to where you are. And yet here it is, you're fighting and carrying on like you are some like, you know, like the original Targaryen here to set things straight. And it really just speaks to the desperation. You yourself personally, Alicent, have no claim to the throne. By virtue of giving birth to Viserys' children, which, I mean, given how decrepit he's looking, you've made some sacrifices. I understand that. But it's like, you yourself don't have a claim to the throne, but you're going harder than everybody else. And it's like in the midst of this, you know, when it seems like Viserys has calmed things down and gotten to the bottom of the situation, and it's like, okay, fine, like the kid lost his eye, and that's not a good thing, but it's like, we're going to let the mitre drop here. She instead insists that no, there has to be some kind of payback. Someone has to pay for this. And it's actually incredibly, it speaks to her character, where this is a child, and it was bad enough what happened to your son, but you're calling for this other kid to lose his eye. Who does that benefit? This is just you thinking with your emotions, and Viserys tells her as much. And as part of this, you then have it where when she calls on Sir Christian Cole to attack the boy. And it's like, you're the queen, he's the king, he's the actual ruler. And it's like, well, don't listen to him, listen to me. Do what I tell you. Disregard what Viserys is saying and take the boy's eye. Sir Christian Cole hesitates, and she instead pulls the blade and attempts to do it herself, with Rhaenyra stepping in to save her son, and in her desperation, she ends up cutting Rhaenyra. And as part of that, you have it where when they're finally parted, you know, like, Rhaenyra's been pretty patient, I think, in understanding with her thus far. But Rhaenyra expresses that this whole display, this bloodlust on Alicent's part, really speaks to her character. Where, number one, you're willing to viciously attack a child in retaliation. And then secondly, like, you just keep coming and keep trying to go after this kid, even with his mother in the way, physically harming her in the process. And then it's like, it's again this thing of people lying about who they are, but showing their true selves. Where this started out as supposedly her quest for righteousness, right? Because really it's like, why are you so concerned with what Rhaenyra has going on? Just mind your business and going about your business. Tend to what concerns you. But here it is that you have it where she's meddling, mixing into things that don't concern her under the guise of righteousness, of doing what's right. But in the process of that, you saw that last episode, she didn't outright tell Larys to attack the Strongs, but she kind of helped to set that in motion. And then here you have it where she kind of like throws away the mask of civility and righteousness by attempting to attack Rhaenyra's son. You know, just like pulling back the veil, pulling back the curtain on her true character. That she's actually a terrible person. And so with that, I have not liked Alicent, but I am most certainly, in this division between the two, I am most certainly not Team Alicent. Thanks for tuning in. To ensure you don't miss any episodes, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, go ahead and click the thumbs up button if you like what you saw, and go ahead and share it on social media.